Hey listeners, have you ever wanted to delve into the social or psychological causes behind true crime? Then you might like our podcast, Women in Crime. Each episode, you'll hear a new female-focused case or topic deconstructed by experts. It's where true crime meets criminology. I'm Megan Sachs.
I'm Amy Sloshberg, and we are both criminologists and have spent our entire career studying and teaching about crime. We'll cover cases involving females as criminals and as victims, but often these are one and the same.
You'll hear the stories of these women paired with the science that tells you where it all began. Crime is different for women. Listen and learn why on Women in Crime.
You can listen to Women in Crime now on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
That's Women, A-N-D, Crime.
You're listening to DNA ID, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Citizen Detective,
and
Campus Killings.
all of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
It was May 24th, 1995. A South Carolina Highway Department employee was operating a mower to cut the grass on a remote, swampy stretch of Cottonhall Road in Yemassee. This is State Road S-748 in Beaufort County, South Carolina, a remote two-lane road which runs between U.S. Highway 21 and Old Sheldon Church Road in plantation country. The surroundings are huge private plantations where curated crops are grown, harvested, and sold. The stately homes populating them are valued at millions. It was the last place the highway worker expected to come across a body, but there was one. A dead woman lay in a drainage ditch cutting through the overgrown grass. She wore only underpants. The finding of this woman's remains was fortuitous because she had only very recently died. In this area of the country with the summer heat, bodies decompose very quickly. No doubt whoever had placed the woman in the ditch hoped that she would remain there undiscovered for as long as possible. But the woman's remains were fresh, dead only a day or two. Her facial features were clear and distinct. Beaufort County Sheriff's deputies responded to the scene. As reported by the highway worker, they discovered that a dead woman lay on her back in the ditch. Other than the underwear, she had no personal possessions or identifying materials on her body or anywhere around it. The Beaufort County investigators summoned the coroner who transported Beaufort County Jane Doe for autopsy at the Medical University of South Carolina. At the autopsy, the pathologist documented the Jane Doe as a white woman with some Hispanic and possibly Asian heritage. Her age was estimated to be in her early 30s, placing the years of her birth likely between 1961 and 1964. She was petite, at about 5'3" tall, and weighed just 118 to 120 pounds. Her red hair was colored. Her natural hair was brown and curly. Her body bore evidence of previous medical care. She had a 3-inch surgical scar on her neck from thyroid surgery. She had a C-section scar, and her uterus had been removed in a complete surgical hysterectomy. She also had carefully manicured nails and double-pierced ears, although no earrings were on the body. Someone did not want this woman to be identified, and that's because the manner of her death was homicide. The cause of death was ligature strangulation. The woman had also been beaten, as evidenced by fresh bruising on her body. She had been killed only about 24 hours prior to being discovered in the ditch. But there was evidence of longer-term abuse as well. Captain Robert Bromage, a cold case investigator for the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office, told the Island Packet that pre-existing bruises and a laceration inside Jane Doe's mouth, likely from a punch, led investigators to believe she was probably in a volatile relationship. Plus, evidence suggested the Jane Doe had been killed in a different location from where the body was deposited in the ditch. In fact, they believed she had been transported some distance by car to where she was found. This was because the autopsy observed lividity pointing to the body lying in the same position for the first 12 hours after death. The investigators believed she was placed in the trunk of a car or the bed of a truck and driven for 12 hours or more to Beaufort County. They noted the proximity of the dump site to two major highways, U.S. Highway 17 and I-95. Jane Doe had been brought to Yemassee from somewhere else, somewhere possibly outside the state. Police were unable to find any missing persons reports that matched up with their Jane Doe. Here's where things are going to get a little tricky in reporting this case to you. Investigators revealed that there were no signs of sexual assault, and swabs taken at the autopsy detected no presence of sperm. But investigators later hedged, saying that markers of sexual activity were detected, although they refused to elaborate. More on that later. Dental impressions were taken from Jane Doe to be searched against dental records of missing persons. She had had excellent dental care, it was noted. A complete set of fingerprints was also collected from Jane Doe, but no matches turned up for her in APHIS or in South Carolina state databases. A blood sample was collected and a tox screen run, which was negative. The blood sample was retained for DNA identification purposes. Finally, photographs of Jane Doe were taken, and a sketch of her features was done by artist Bethany Crooks. She was entered into the National Crime Information Center database, known as NCIC. On May 29th, Beaufort County officials released the sketch and asked the public to call in tips. Between NCIC and the public appeal, hundreds of tips came into the sheriff's office, but none led to an identification. Eventually, Jane Doe was cremated, boxed up, and stored at the coroner's office. Investigators focused on the one piece of evidence they had in the case, the underwear Jane Doe was wearing. They were Leonisa brand, not available in the United States. The underwear were manufactured in Colombia and sold throughout South and Central America. This bolstered the opinion of the pathologist that the woman likely was of Hispanic heritage. In 1998, Beaufort County elected a new sheriff, P.J. Tanner. Tanner campaigned on a promise to re-examine the unsolved homicides in his jurisdiction. So he created the Cold Case Investigations Initiative in January 1999. Captain Bromwich took the lead on the Jane Doe case. He saw to it that Jane Doe's case was entered into both NamUs and the Doe Network, knowing that web sleuthers among the public can be very tenacious when it comes to identifying does. Rule out after rule out raised and then dashed investigators' hopes. The next step was to conduct SDR DNA testing on the blood sample collected at Jane Doe's autopsy and have SLED enter her and her DNA profile into the CODIS database for unidentified human remains to compare against the DNA of missing persons in that database. This, too, led nowhere. In 2004, the Beaufort investigators created and released computer-generated images of Jane Doe. In 2006, more work was done to try to identify her. She was entered into VICAP, which alerts law enforcement agencies of similar crimes around the nation. And then they took the investigation beyond U.S. borders. Captain Bromwich requested that Interpol issue what's known as a black notice, a notification about an unknown body that can be issued by the General Secretariat of Interpol to the 195 member countries. Nothing. In 2007, the BCSO arranged for digital renderings of Jane Doe to be prepared based on her autopsy photos, and they submitted the blood sample collected at Jane Doe's autopsy to a company called DNA Print Genomics for sequencing to try to determine her heritage. DNA Print Genomics reported that people with similar DNA markers were South Asian, Hispanic, and Middle Eastern. Investigators concluded that, as predicted by the original pathologist and her underwear sold only in South and Central America, her ancestry was likely Hispanic. This from the Island Packet, quote, in 2010, Bromwich's team appealed to the Spanish-speaking television network Univision for help. One of its best-known reporters, Sacha Preto, came to Beaufort County, interviewed Bromwich about the case, and broadcast an April 2011 story that included a photo approximating how the victim appeared in real life, end quote. After that broadcast, many tips were called in, one of which suggested that Jane Doe could be a missing woman named Josefina Nava, a Dominican woman who had disappeared in Italy in the early 1990s. Josefina's photos looked like the images of Jane Doe, and she had double-pierced ears. Captain Bromwich sent an FBI agent to collect DNA samples from Josefina's mother and son in the Dominican Republic. Well, it wasn't her. Josefina is still missing. In 2010, a volunteer cold case committee at the BCSO comprising 12 retired law enforcement, lawyers, pathologists, and forensic experts took on the case. Captain Bromwich, who doubled as Hilton Head Island's Director of Public Safety, spearheaded the committee. Volunteers were provided access to the case file in hopes that fresh sets of eyes would progress the investigation. They noted that Jane Doe's several surgeries appeared to be professional work likely done in the U.S. Her hands and feet were well cared for and pointed to her being upper middle class rather than a migrant worker. This from the Island Packet in 2010, quote, since joining the cold case team in January, Cecilia Woods, a retired FBI supervisory special agent, has spent hours picking apart the little evidence found on the woman's body. Ever since I got involved, it's been my baby, said Woods, who worked in the International Relations section at the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. for 8 years until retiring in 2005. The body was discovered by a groundskeeper in a remote stretch of the county that Woods described as a fork in the road in the middle of a swamp. It's such a remote area, somebody may have known about that location. We can't disregard that it may have been someone who knew her well, said Ms. Woods, adding that evidence at the scene suggests the crime was personal in nature. Woods declined to elaborate, end quote. Okay, so I'm going to state here that the investigators have said on a number of occasions that they believe Jane Doe was murdered by someone who knew her. This was not an instance of a serial killer randomly abducting her, killing her, and dumping her. They felt, based on the removal of all clothing and jewelry, the placing of her body in the ditch, rather than haphazard dumping, the previous signs of abuse, and the up-close and personal means of killing her, beating and strangulation, pointed to someone in her life being her murderer. And they still think that. In 2017, Beaufort County investigators issued a release about the now 21-year-old case. The release sought information about Jane Doe, whom, the release stated, was of Hispanic descent and may have been visiting the United States. They believe she had been killed by someone with a personal motive to hide her identity, such as a boyfriend or a spouse. A reward of up to $2,500 for information leading to an arrest was announced. In May of 2018, another release was issued, this one clarifying that Jane Doe, dumped in a drainage ditch near Yemassee on May 24, 1995, had been involved in some kind of sexual activity close to the time of her death. What the nature of this activity was not specified. I suspect that updated testing was conducted on swabs collected at autopsy, and biological materials were detected that were undetectable back in 1995. I was told there are markers for sexual activity at autopsy in the lab analysis. In 2020, the decision was made to identify Jane Doe once and for all, and for that, they needed forensic genealogy. There was very little blood left in the vial collected at her autopsy, and the SNP testing might use it all up. But Bob Bromwich told me that they decided to go for it. It was a calculated decision. He felt they owed it to the family and her to do it after 27 years of her identity not being known. The BCSO selected Parabon Nanolabs to do the work. The sample was provided to their partner lab, a SNP profile obtained, and uploaded to the open-source genealogy databases. It was a long and tedious process. I have to admit to not being privy to much information on the forensic genealogy in this case. Because it is an active and ongoing investigation, the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office is being very circumspect about the amount of information they're making public. I do know that Parabon's genealogist expended a 15-hour research block on the case, and then the work was taken over by BCSO retired detective and volunteer Melanie Beckler. She picked up the extensive family tree of Jane Doe and worked to email hundreds of potential distant relatives to flesh out the family tree and find out where Jane Doe fit in. According to the Post and Courier, many of those relatives were not eager to cooperate. Then I found this. A woman named Codalette posted on WebSleuth in June 2022, quote, I recently learned about this case. I received a call from a detective a few days back. My sister and I matched the victim through our maternal side. As I understand, we might have a great-grandparent or great-great-grandparent in common. My sister and I are 100% Puerto Rican from the East Coast. The lingerie brand caught my attention. The Leonisa underwear brand was pretty popular in Puerto Rico back in the 90s and only sold via consignment. It was also quite pricey, like Victoria's Secret. I called my grandmother, who's 98 years old, to ask if she knew of anyone missing amongst our extended family. No luck. I luckily have a second cousin once removed that has been working really hard on the family tree, and she has been able to narrow the search to a specific ward in our hometown with the help of the detective. Looks very promising. The connection they've identified connects our hometown and New York. As a match to the victim, I was 57 centimorgans while my sister was about 80 centimorgans. There were common ancestors from both my maternal grandparent branches. From the little amount of information that was shared with me back when I was contacted for the genealogical research, they had immediate DNA matches, but some of the contacts declined to provide further information. They were trying to trace distant relatives back to that immediate match, or so I understood when I spoke to the investigators. All that from Codelette on Websleuth. Okay, well, you heard it. Many people were uncooperative. According to a BCSO release, Melanie Beckler conducted research on thousands of Jane Doe's genetically connected relatives. I don't know how many reference samples were collected, but the genealogy research continued through 2020, 2021, and into late 2022 before the investigators were able to figure out Jane Doe's likely identity. Ms. Beckler contacted the adult son of the woman in the family tree she suspected was Jane Doe and asked him to upload his commercial test DNA profile into GEDmatch. He agreed because his mother had been missing for decades. Within hours, Parabon was able to verify a parent-child match between this man and Jane Doe. The man verified that his mother, Maria Telles-Gonzalez, had disappeared suddenly in 1995. He confirmed that she had dyed red hair, a hysterectomy, a C-section, and thyroid surgery. His sister sent Captain Bromwich a photo of their mother, and he recognized her immediately as Beaufort County Jane Doe. After the BCSO investigators received confirmation that they had identified Jane Doe and located her family, they traveled to Florida to meet with her husband, half-siblings, and 2 of her children. They were accompanied by detectives from the Sumter County Sheriff's Office. They learned that in 1995, Maria was married and had 3 teenage children. The 36-year-old lived with her family on Merrimack Drive in Kissimmee, Florida, hundreds of miles from where she was found in South Carolina. And her family remembered just when they had last seen Maria. In spring of 1995, late April or early May, they said that Maria had traveled to Puerto Rico to visit extended family. I'd like to state here that this trip has not been confirmed by investigators. Anyway, after her visit, she came home. She arrived at the house one evening, suitcase in tow, and the next morning she saw her kids off to school. When they got back from school that afternoon, Maria and her suitcase were gone, although her car was there. Of course, the first question I asked was whether Maria's husband was also home on the day she disappeared. Apparently, the children remembered that he was home that morning, and he was also home when they got home from school. Only Maria was gone. Maria's children had grown up believing that their mother abandoned them. That's why Maria had never been reported missing. In November 2022, the BCSO investigators held a press conference announcing the identification of Maria Telles-Gonzalez and seeking information. Captain Bromwich stated, "This is far from over. This is an active murder investigation, but we have focus at this point." Well, that focus was on whoever killed Maria. After learning from the family that Maria had a best friend named Patty, the investigators issued a press release with a photo of Patty from the 1995 time frame, an age-advanced rendering of what she would look like now. They knew she lived in Hawaii with her military husband before moving to Kissimmee. They needed to find her. They also were interested in speaking with a man whom the family remembered Maria was close with, but they didn't know his name. The investigators released photos of this man as well, describing him as a Hispanic man who might be from Colombia, South America. Well, they found Patty, and Patty was able to tell them the name of this male friend of Maria's, a man she had been romantically involved with for several months. His name was Carlos, last name unknown. Investigators are eager to find Carlos. This is all from information released by the BCSO. In the mid-90s, Carlos, a Hispanic male, was in his early or mid-30s, with a slender build and a height of 5'8" and signs of a receding hairline. He lived in Central Florida, possibly near the Orlando area, and spoke excellent English. Quote, "Finding Carlos is of critical importance to furthering the investigation at this point," Captain Bromwich said in a video. "Carlos may have information on the circumstances of her disappearance and her death," end quote. They released a photo of Carlos and Maria on the beach and one of them snuggling. Age-progressed images of Carlos were released to show what he would look like today. I'll post some of these photos of Carlos on our social media. The FDLE issued a press release that stated, quote, investigators are requesting the public to review 1995 photographs of Carlos as well as age progression images and provide any information on his identity. He is a suspect in the murder of Maria Telles-Gonzalez. Okay, wait, what? A suspect? Well, Captain Bromwich told me that this verbiage was a miscommunication, and the FDLE should not have stated that. All other reports have been that Carlos is wanted as a witness who could have vital information about Maria's fate. I asked Captain Bromwich last week whether they had located Carlos, and he declined to provide information about that. His investigation is ongoing. Investigators have not ruled out anyone in their search for Maria's killer. As I said, this case is open and active, and I don't have any details on the current focus of the investigation. But it seems to me that knowing what we know about Maria, there are two men who should be looked at, Carlos and Maria's husband. I found a dissolution of marriage notice published in a Florida newspaper in December 1998. It was a public notice to Maria Telles of the petition and dissolution of marriage by her husband, Jorge. He waited 3 years after Maria's disappearance to formally end their marriage. He was the man who was home alone with her when she disappeared with her suitcase. He did not report her missing. As you can imagine, the investigators wanted to follow up with Jorge. But the family shut down that line of inquiry by hiring attorneys. They no longer cooperate with the investigation. When I asked Captain Bromwich whether Jorge had any connection to the Yemassee area where his wife's body was found, he declined to answer. Then there is Carlos. Carlos was in a relationship with Maria outside her marriage, and as far as I know, he has not come forward to speak with investigators. If he is not responsible for what happened to Maria, he owes it to her to identify himself and cooperate with the investigation. In 2023, Maria's cremains were returned to her family. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement is now working with the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office to solve Maria's murder. Captain Bromwich formally retired in June 2022, but he still runs the cold case team, and he is still working Maria's case on an unpaid voluntary basis as a reserve officer. If you have any information about the murder of Maria Telles-Gonzalez or the identity and whereabouts of Carlos, please call cold case investigator Bob Bromwich at 843-816-8013. Recently, I let listeners know about a new benefit available to them called an AbJack Insider subscription that's available through Apple Podcasts. An AbJack Insider subscription will give listeners ad-free access to every bit of DNA ID content published, both past episodes and future episodes. It will also give you benefits like early access and bonus content. Head over to Apple Podcasts and click on the DNA ID show page or the AbJack Entertainment channel to start a free trial. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. If you'd like to listen to the show ad-free and help support the show in the process, please head over to patreon.com/DNAID. And if you're interested in some fun DNA ID merch, visit the store at customizedgirl.com/s/DNAID podcast. To contact the show, please email us at dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at DNAID Podcast on Instagram, at DNAID Podcast on Twitter, or on Facebook at facebook.com/DNAID Podcast. Finally, if you want to visit our website, go to DNAIDpodcast.com. You'll be able to get all the episodes of the show, leave comments on episodes that I can respond to, and you can even leave voicemails. You'll get all the latest news about the show and important updates. Find links to our social media, merch, and a lot more. It's really your one-stop shop for everything DNA ID. DNA ID is written, researched, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt. Check out our other collaborative podcasts, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime.